I used to know this version of Allison, the one in the kitchen during every family gathering. White button-down, hair tied low, stirring sauce with one hand while yelling across the room asking me if the seasoning was okay. She was such a perfectionist that even the grapes on the cheese platter had to sit at the right angle. No one loved family dinners more than Allison, at least back then. But that day felt different. It was my dad's 70th birthday. Not a huge party, just about 24 people, close family, a few old friends, longtime neighbors. Everyone had arrived. In the kitchen, my mom was taking the cake out of the oven. My sister was rummaging for the carving knife. I was peeling apples, trying not to let my hands show what I was really feeling. Allison was in the living room, alone, staring at the phone she'd been glued to since morning. I could see her from the kitchen, legs crossed, eyes locked on the screen, fingers scrolling nonstop. I was more surprised than anyone. The kitchen used to be her kingdom during the holidays. She once stayed mad for a whole week because someone changed one side dish without asking. And now, she wasn't even in the room. I gently asked if she could help my mom, even just to plate the cake. She didn't look up. I thought maybe she didn't hear, so I asked again. Still nothing. Just the cold blue glow of her phone lighting up her cheek, and the hint of a smile that wasn't meant for me. Dad hadn't come down yet. The kids were in the corner playing chess with my uncle. The house was full of voices, clinking plates, laughter, the clatter of silverware. But in the middle of all that noise, the silence coming from where Allison sat felt louder than anything else. Heavy, dense, saying more than words ever could. Dinner started right on time. Everyone raised a glass. I saw my dad smile, grateful to still be surrounded by family. I scanned the table, trying to hold on to something that still felt like home. But my eyes landed on Allison, scrolling again. Then she set her glass down and stood up. She said she had something to share, that this was the right moment to say what she'd been holding in for a while. We were going to sell the house. She had met someone she truly loved, and they were planning a wedding after the divorce. She was going to have another baby, and their new family needed a bigger home so all the kids, including Thomas's son, would have room to grow. She said it like she was pitching at a startup panel. Calm, confident, emotionless. No regret, no guilt. I stood up, pulled an envelope from my jacket, placed it next to the untouched salad plate. Then I said, low enough not to ruin the party, loud enough for her to hear, "If you're making announcements, I guess I will too." Then I sat back down and continued enjoying the meal my mom had spent all day preparing, under the stunned gaze of a woman who had no idea what was coming. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes the quietest journeys are the ones most worth following. Allison said she needed space to grow, that she'd just been offered a regional ambassador role for a new cosmetics brand, and that these weekend retreats were helping women reconnect with themselves. She said it all in that rehearsed, airy tone of someone who's finally been seen after years of quiet suffering, like she was the protagonist in some self-love redemption arc. I didn't argue. I figured if she felt she needed that, I should support her. So I stayed home, watched the kids, cooked, helped Faith prep for her SATs, took Ethan camping. No one said it out loud, but slowly, I became the anchor holding everything steady while she drifted between cities, hotels, and empowerment seminars. One time I went to grab my jacket from the bedroom and heard a soft whisper. She was on FaceTime with someone. By the time I walked in, the screen was black. She smiled and said her brand's assistant had called about something urgent. But I've never seen a brand assistant make you tuck your hair behind your ear or smile like that, with that soft, warm look in your eyes. I didn't say a word. I thought about something my mom once told me. When you're not sure what you're seeing, blink and wait. If it's real, it'll show itself. One afternoon, Faith, she was a senior then, was sitting next to me in the living room, scrolling her phone. She let out a small laugh and turned to me. She asked, "Why's Mom posting a dinner story with someone and you're not there?" I didn't answer right away. I asked her to show me. The picture was blurry but familiar. An Italian restaurant table, 2 glasses of wine, 2 sets of silverware. Allison was wearing the green dress she once said was only for special occasions. The person across from her wasn't visible. Just a man's arm, wearing a watch with white shirt cuffs peeking from under a blazer sleeve. I told Faith it was probably a colleague. She nodded and didn't ask again. That night, I logged into our old shared Uber account, the one she used to use for both of us. I scrolled through the ride history. One address popped up again and again. Not her office, not a hotel, just a residential building on the east side of town. I looked it up on Google Maps. 3rd floor apartment. Kids' playground right below. One day, by chance, I ran into Ben, a guy I used to know from college who now works at a local bank, at a school board meeting for Ethan's high school. We didn't talk often, just happened to be seated next to each other in the waiting area. While we were waiting for our turn to speak, he leaned over and asked a simple, casual question. "How's Allison doing these days?" I gave a strained smile and said she was keeping busy with her new job. Ben nodded, then offhandedly mentioned something about a recent call. Allison had contacted his branch, asking about the process for withdrawing funds from a joint marital savings account. She was curious if it was possible to transfer a large sum to a digital wallet if the recipient's name didn't match the account holder's. He shared the story like it was nothing, just one of those forgettable customer service anecdotes. And then he moved on. But to me, it felt like a knock at the door in the middle of the night. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I made myself a cup of ginger tea and sat down at my desk. The room was quiet. The computer screen lit up as I logged into the joint bank account, the one we'd used since our first year of marriage, where we slowly built our savings over time. It didn't take long to find what I was afraid of. A transaction for $30,000, processed 3 weeks earlier, transferred to a digital wallet under the name G. Thomas. I didn't know who G. Thomas was, but I knew that name had never once come up at our dinner table, on any vacation, or in any conversation we'd had across 23 years of marriage. I took a screenshot, saved it in a new folder labeled private. Then I shut the laptop. I didn't call Allison. I didn't slam the table. I didn't ask questions. I just sat there, holding a now cold cup of tea, staring out at the backyard, watching the kids' swing move gently back and forth, even though no one was sitting in it. The peak of the betrayal hit on a quiet weekend morning. I was taking Ethan to get some photos taken for his application to the state chess championship his school was sponsoring. The photo studio wasn't far, just around the corner on Willow Street. It was the same old family studio where we once had our portrait taken, the one that still hung in the dining room. Back then, that photo had meant something. It used to be a good memory. While Ethan was inside the studio getting his shots, I waited by the front desk, letting my eyes wander to kill time. The walls were still lined with client photos, weddings, family portraits, a few moody black and white frames arranged by season. Then my gaze landed on a frame hung slightly crooked near the windowsill. Allison. She was standing beside a man, taller than her by half a head, his arm casually wrapped around her lower back in the kind of way that only someone close would dare. Next to them stood a young boy, maybe 7, in a crisp white shirt, staring straight into the camera with wide, innocent eyes. A face I didn't recognize, a face that didn't belong to me. I stepped a little closer, pretending to admire the photo next to it. Then, quietly, I slipped my phone out of my pocket and angled it just right to capture a quick shot of the image. When the studio assistant returned to the counter, I pointed to the photo and asked, softly, keeping my tone steady, if she remembered when that family had their session done. Said they looked oddly familiar. She followed my gaze, then nodded like it came back to her. Told me that one was taken sometime late last fall. They had come in on a weekday morning celebrating the little boy's birthday. Sweet family, she said. So photogenic that the studio had asked permission to display their photo as a sample. I nodded, said thanks, didn't ask anything else. When Ethan came out, grinning from ear to ear after his first solo photo shoot in a real studio, I smiled back like everything was fine. On the drive home, I played soft music and told him a silly story about his grandfather as a kid. I didn't let him look back, didn't let him see what I had just seen. Some truths don't need to come through the frame. Have you ever been through something like this? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it too. I honestly don't remember how I drove us home after that photo session. Ethan was in the back seat, still buzzing with excitement from his first official studio shoot. He kept talking about how the photographer showed him different poses, how if he won the state chess tournament this year, he might get a sponsored trip to nationals. I listened. I smiled. I nodded at all the right times, but my mind was still stuck on that picture, on that wall, where Allison stood beside a man who wasn't me, with a child who wasn't mine. That night, once the whole house was asleep, I sat alone in my home office, saved the photo into a folder labeled private. The next day, I reached out to Richard, a longtime friend, and the attorney who had helped me draft our prenuptial agreement before the wedding. We met at a quiet coffee shop where no one knew us. I handed him copies of our bank statements, the photo from the studio, and a list of observations I'd been logging on my phone for weeks. Richard didn't ask too many questions. He looked through everything, nodded, then started laying out an exit path, quiet, legal, and gentle enough not to carve deep scars into our children's lives. The house we lived in, my grandfather's old place, passed down through 3 generations, was clearly listed as separate property in our prenup. It was considered a non-marital asset. That meant, legally, I could transfer the title fully into my name. No consent from Allison required, no justification needed. I nodded, and we began the paperwork, in silence. We also discussed setting up a private trust fund for Faith and Ethan, one that didn't bear my name or tie back to any marital asset. Something airtight, where I could be certain their education and future wouldn't get caught in the wreckage of whatever storm was coming. Each night, after the house settled into sleep, I'd slip into my office, make a cup of ginger tea, and sit down with my notes. I tracked where Allison said she was going, and where she actually went. I logged Uber receipts, forwarded promo emails that accidentally got sent to our shared inbox. I took screenshots of Instagram stories where she was tagged. Sometimes it was just the background of a rooftop bar or a hotel lobby, a cocktail on the table, but in the reflection of a mirror, I'd catch glimpses of him. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just documented. Quietly, cleanly, with timestamps. That evening, we sat around the dinner table like we had for every holiday, every birthday, every familiar celebration. But I knew this time was different. The ivory tablecloth had been pressed smooth since early morning. Candles were already lit before the sun dipped below the horizon, their glow reflecting off my mother's wrinkled hands as she sliced the first piece of garlic bread. My father sat at the head of the table, like always. Faith and Ethan were teasing each other across the table about the salad missing its dressing. To an outsider, it might have looked like a warm, ordinary family dinner. But something, even if small, felt offbeat, just a little out of tune. Allison sat at the far end, wearing that teal dress she used to say was for special occasions. I guess tonight counted. For her, at least. She barely looked up from her phone all evening, not to text the kids, not to post a birthday wish for my father. She just sat there, scrolling endlessly, like she was counting down to something no one else could see. We had just raised our glasses for my dad's 70th. The room was full of laughter, the clinking of silverware, old stories being retold like everyone was trying to hold on to the moment just a little longer. I don't remember exactly which dish was being served when Allison set down her glass and stood up, but I remember the sound her chair made scraping softly against the hardwood floor. Quiet, but cold. At that moment, my mother was recalling a vacation we took in Maine back when I was in college. Faith had just laughed, half cringing, and corrected her on the hotel name. The room was still warm. Allison placed a hand on the back of her chair, standing straighter than usual. She said she had something important to share. She looked around the room, one face at a time. Then she said that she and Thomas were engaged. They'd be getting married early next year, at a countryside venue out of state. Somewhere, in her words, more grounded and warm than anything we've had before. She continued in that oddly cheerful, detached tone, like she was announcing someone else's life. She said they wanted to grow their family, that Thomas's son was thrilled about having a sibling, and that with the love they shared, they were ready to welcome another child. I didn't look at her then. I looked at Ethan, his eyes fixed on his plate, spinning a single baked bean with his fork. He didn't look up. Faith had stopped eating entirely. I sat still, my hand resting on the neatly folded napkin in my lap. Beneath the table, my fingers dug lightly into the edge of the wood. I heard my mother clear her throat quietly beside me. My dad let out the softest sigh. No one spoke right away. Then she said we, as in Allison and I, would be selling this house. So they, meaning her and Thomas, could build a home large enough, modern enough, suitable for Thomas's son and their future child to grow in. She said it was for the kids, for everyone. Allison ended her little speech with something about starting over with more kindness. And in that moment, I think she truly believed she was walking through some beautiful new doorway. But I knew the truth. The door she was opening only existed in her imagination. And I was already looking at the whole picture. Faith's hand had tightened under the table. I reached over and held it. Just enough pressure to say I'm here. I've got you. To anchor her in that moment while the ground shifted under all of us. I picked up my fork and knife again, took a slice of roast beef, cut it in half, chewed slowly, carefully, like I was focused on the rosemary and salt, not on the storm quietly tearing through the center of our dinner. Then I said, calm and measured, "We shouldn't waste such a good meal." Allison wasn't smiling anymore. She didn't move her hand right away, just stared at the cream-colored envelope I had placed in front of her, like it was some foreign object she hadn't planned for. No one else at the table said a word. There were no follow-up jokes about dessert, no reminiscing about childhood. No one asked Ethan about the upcoming tournament. No yelling, no dramatic outbursts. But everyone understood. Something very real had just been placed on the table, and it wouldn't be folded up and put away like the tablecloth afterward. I asked, my eyes still fixed on my plate, "Aren't you going to open it? Don't you want to see what's inside?" She swallowed hard, gave a small smile, one that didn't carry the same confidence it had just minutes before. She said she'd open it later, that we should finish the dinner first. I nodded, didn't press her. By the time the chocolate cake came out, the one my dad always loved, I set my coffee cup down and asked calmly, "So, when were you planning to move out?" This time she looked up. Her eyes weren't hiding anything now, just confusion. She said she hadn't thought about that yet, that this wasn't the right moment to talk logistics. I nodded again and let my gaze drift to the window, where the porch light spilled onto the back lawn. The same patch of grass where, a few summers ago, the kids pitched tents, roasted marshmallows, and slept under the stars just to feel a little adventurous. I didn't say anything more. Truth was, I didn't have to. Allison didn't touch her dessert. The plate sat in front of her untouched, the glossy chocolate frosting still smooth, undisturbed by the tip of a fork. She lingered for a few minutes after I asked, still not opening the envelope, still saying nothing. Then quietly, she stood, picked it up, and told everyone to continue eating. Her voice was soft but firm. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked straight upstairs. The stairs creaked under her heels. I heard the bedroom door close, not slammed, but not gently either. Dinner carried on in a kind of polite silence. We finished the cake, cleared the plates, went through the motions. No one really brought up any more stories. No one tried to restart a conversation. Eventually, my parents stood to leave. My mother hugged me a little tighter than usual. My father placed a hand on my shoulder, said nothing at first, then finally asked, just loud enough that only I could hear, "You doing okay?" I nodded, then answered like it was the truth, and maybe, in some way, it was. I'm better than I've ever been. That night, I didn't sleep in my room. I went to Ethan's instead. Straightened out his bed, tucked away the chess books he'd left open, and lay down beside him. He had already fallen asleep, back turned to me, breathing soft and steady. I reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder, just to be sure the warmth was still there. Allison stayed in the master bedroom. I didn't know if she slept. There were no footsteps, no doors creaking open, no shuffling in the hallway. The house felt still, like the party had never even happened. Ethan came down with a fever the day after the dinner. It lingered for 2 full days. Every night, I stayed up monitoring his temperature, laying cool towels across his forehead, drifting in and out of sleep an hour at a time. His eyes looked heavy, his body kept switching from cold sweats to chills. And each time he managed to doze off, I stayed there, sitting at the edge of the bed, hand on his back, waiting for his breathing to even out. On the 3rd morning, I took him to our regular pediatrician. As I was carrying him down the stairs, Allison stepped out of our bedroom. She saw Ethan resting his head against my shoulder and asked softly, "What happened?" "He's running a fever," I said. She nodded and offered to make some medicine. But when she came closer, Ethan didn't reach for her. He just pressed his face deeper into my neck and whispered, "I want to stay with Dad." I took him to the clinic as scheduled. The nurse said they'd need to do a blood test just to rule out any virus. I waited in the lounge while the doctor reviewed his chart. A few minutes later, they came out and asked me to sign additional paperwork for the family medical history. The doctor, someone we'd known for years, stepped out from the exam room, still holding a stack of freshly printed files. He smiled as always, warm and professional, but there was something in his eyes that morning. A slight pause behind the usual calm. He updated me on Ethan's condition, said the fever was already tapering off and with some rest, we'd be able to take him home soon. Then he invited me into his office to sign a few standard post-visit documents. As he pulled up our family's medical history on his screen, he stopped at Allison's profile. He asked gently if Allison had been keeping up with her follow-up appointments lately. Then he added, almost offhandedly, like a passing medical note, that with her endometrial condition, regular check-ins were really important. I looked up. Endometrial condition? She'd never mentioned anything like that. Not once. We had lived together for nearly 2 decades. Been through 2 births, 1 mild postpartum hemorrhage, the usual fevers, colds, checkups. I was always the one driving her to the hospital, waiting in the lobby, cooking soup, brewing tea. But this was something serious enough for a doctor to say routine monitoring, and I'd never even heard the words. I asked him, keeping my voice as neutral as I could, what that meant for a woman's health long term. He flipped back to her chart, then tapped gently on a faint gray line, easy to overlook if you weren't looking for it. Endometrial surgery, completed post-second delivery, and just beneath it, in even smaller font, high risk of permanent infertility. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at the words. And suddenly, I heard her voice again, in my mind, standing at the head of the table during my father's birthday dinner, announcing her engagement to Thomas, talking about their future, the new home, and how the kids needed more space, because there'll be another one soon. That line felt like it came from someone else, not my wife. She had painted a future she knew couldn't exist. I didn't know if Thomas knew. I wasn't sure if he'd even care, but I knew now, without a doubt. On the drive home, Ethan had fallen asleep in the back seat. I glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror, his little face soft and peaceful, and I thought to myself, in this whole house, maybe he's the only one who shouldn't have to know what's quietly being unraveled. He deserved a whole childhood. And somehow, no matter what else cracked or fell apart around us, I was going to make sure he got it, intact. The court hearing took place on a gray Wednesday morning. No rain, but not a hint of sun either. I arrived early, sat in the car for another 10 minutes with my hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the line of traffic crawl through the distant intersection. Across the street was my lawyer's office, the same one who had stood by me since the day I first realized things were no longer what they seemed. Allison arrived after. She came with Thomas. They stepped out of a rental SUV. Thomas walked a few steps ahead, brisk and detached. Allison followed in a long coat, her face turned slightly downward. Her walk wasn't rushed, but her eyes had lost the confidence they once carried. In court, my attorney laid everything out: financial records, transaction histories showing unauthorized withdrawals from our joint account, a timeline cross-referencing Allison's business trips with Uber logs that placed her at the same locations as Thomas. There were photos too, like the one hanging in the studio I took Ethan to, the one where she stood, not with me and our kids, but beside another man and another child. Allison's lawyer tried to respond, but the defense was thin. They cited emotional strain, marital conflict, and personal imbalance. But truth doesn't bend to excuses. The house, my grandfather's house, had never been a marital asset. She had no right to sell it, no right to dictate its future. The judge issued a clear ruling. All assets were to remain exactly as outlined in the prenuptial agreement. The money Allison had withdrawn would be repaid in full. She would receive nothing beyond the original short-term support we had agreed on long ago. When the session ended, I glanced at Thomas. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Allison either. He stood up, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and walked out of the courtroom like a man leaving a conference he'd never wanted to attend in the first place. I think even then, Thomas still believed they could make it, that this was all just money, and that their feelings would survive it. Allison kept pushing forward with the wedding plans. I heard they had booked a new venue, smaller, more modest, but still with a guest list, still with a dress. But then everything shifted. Thomas requested one last step before the ceremony, a premarital fertility screening. Totally normal at their age, especially with both of them having kids from previous relationships and talking about having another together. Allison brushed it off at first, said she had regular checkups, that it wasn't necessary, but Thomas insisted. Maybe because deep down, he'd already started to doubt her. Maybe because he'd been lied to once. That was the moment she couldn't keep it hidden any longer. Medical records don't lie. When the results came back, Allison had nothing else to say. Thomas vanished from her life with a single phone call that lasted less than 2 minutes. He canceled the wedding, left her to send the follow-up emails explaining why the invites she'd already mailed no longer meant anything. I didn't learn that from Allison. I found out because her attorney sent an official letter withdrawing all attempts to renegotiate the divorce terms. She wanted it finalized, quickly. Said the emotional pressure had become too much. From that moment on, everything she'd clung to, her new love, her imagined family, her bright new beginning, collapsed like a house of cards. Built on lies, it didn't just fall, it vanished. And when the illusion crumbled, all that remained was emptiness. No one was there to help her up. No one believed her anymore. I never remarried, not because there weren't chances, but because I needed to relearn how to live with myself, really live. Starting from the smallest things I used to let someone else handle, or worse, convince myself weren't worth caring about. I started making my own coffee every morning, the way I like it, strong, barely any sugar. I cleaned out the garage, sorted through boxes that hadn't been touched since Faith was in first grade, some still labeled in her handwriting. I drove Ethan to school every day. One morning I accidentally dropped the lunchbox he'd packed himself. We looked at each other, stunned for a second, then laughed like we'd just discovered how to forgive each other's clumsiness. Every weekend I worked in the backyard, the same spot where Allison once kept a stationary bike, something she bought in a burst of motivation and then barely used. That corner is now a neat row of lavender, pale purple under the sun, quietly fragrant. I'd never even noticed the scent before. One evening, as we were setting the dinner table, Faith looked at me, her hands holding the old ceramic mug her mom used to drink from. Then she asked, "Are you ever going to date again, Dad?" I looked at her and let out a soft laugh. Didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped out into the backyard, where the lavender I planted had just started to bloom under the soft glow of the porch light. I don't know how things will turn out, but I feel okay. And sometimes, that's enough to start again. Thanks for staying with me until the end. If you believe that quiet healing deserves to be heard, like, comment, or subscribe to hear more stories like this one.